Have you ever just looked around at the world and thought, hang on, haven't we been here before? It's this feeling that maybe, just maybe, history isn't a straight line forward, but something that moves in circles. Well, today, we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating theory that explores exactly that idea. You know, this feeling of uncertainty, it's not new at all. Back in 1997, historians William Strauss and Neil Howe kicked off their book, The Fourth Turning, with that exact sentiment. They pointed out that even in a time of relative peace and prosperity, there was this weird mood of pessimism, a sense that things were just rotting from the inside. It's a feeling that probably sounds pretty familiar to a lot of us today, and it really sets the stage for a totally different way of looking at time itself. So, most of us were probably taught to see time as a straight line, right? A constant march forward, always progressing. That's the linear view. But what if that's not the whole story? What if time is actually cyclical? What if history doesn't just repeat itself, but it rhymes in these predictable, almost seasonal patterns? That's the core idea we're going to unpack here. Okay, so what's the big deal? What's really wrong with thinking of history as just one long, straight line of progress? Well, here's the problem. When things get chaotic and the future feels shaky, that linear model just kind of falls apart. The authors argue that it leaves us feeling alone and restless because it can't explain the downturns. I mean, if we're always supposed to be getting better and better, why does it so often feel like things are coming apart at the seams? And that feeling, that question, brings us to a really powerful alternative, the ancient idea that time has a secret rhythm. Now, check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. Our own language kind of gives the game away. The very words we use for time are rooted in the cycles of nature, the tides, the moon's orbit, the circle of the year. Our ancestors didn't see time as a line. They saw it as a wheel that was constantly turning. So building on that ancient wisdom, you have Strauss and Howe, and they argued that American history isn't just a series of random events. Nope. Instead, they say it follows a recurring pattern, a predictable cycle of social and political moods that they call the fourth turning. All right, let's break this cycle down. The best way to think about it is like the 4 seasons of a year, but instead of playing out over 12 months, it plays out over the course of a long human life. The fundamental unit of their theory is something they call the Saeculum. It's basically a chunk of time, about 80 to 90 years, and each one of these is made up of 4 distinct phases, or turnings, that each last about 20 years. And these are the 4 seasons of history. You've got the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. Each one flows into the next and sets the stage for what's to come. So, first up is the high. This is the spring. It's an era that comes right after a major crisis. Think about the 1950s, after World War II. Society is generally confident, institutions are strong, and people are really focused on pulling together for the common good. The community is everything. But spring leads to summer, and next comes the awakening. This is when the kids who grew up during that conformist high start to rebel. Think of the massive cultural and spiritual shifts of the 1960s and 70s. It's all about passionate individualism and challenging the old institutions. That summer of rebellion then gives way to the unraveling, which is the autumn of the cycle. The focus on the individual is now dominant, but institutions are seen as weak and corrupt. Think about the cynical, fragmented culture of the 1990s. The overall mood is pretty pessimistic. And finally, everything leads to the crisis. The winter. This is a time of maximum danger but also collective action. Society is forced to deal with some huge threat, and in the process, it tears down the old failing system to build something new from the ashes. The last big one was the period of the Great Depression and World War II. So, what's actually powering this whole cycle? What pushes history from one season to the next? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple. It's us. It's generations. It's an idea that's as old as Homer, really. He put it beautifully, saying generations are like leaves on a tree. They come and go in their own seasons. The theory argues that where a generation is in its own life cycle totally shapes the mood of the time. Okay, so Strauss and Howe identified these 4 generational archetypes. Now the key here, the most important part, is that each archetype is forged by the specific historical season they come of age in. So, for example, prophets, like the baby boomers, are born during a stable high, but they come of age during a rebellious awakening, which makes them moralistic visionaries. Then you have nomads, like Gen X. They're born in that awakening, but grow up to be pragmatic survivors during a cynical unraveling. Heroes, like the GI generation, are born during that unraveling, but are tested and defined by a massive crisis, making them community builders. And finally, artists like the silent generation are born during a crisis, but mature into flexible, detail-oriented experts during a stable high. It's the era you grow up in that stamps your generation's personality for life.
So, here's the bottom line. The engine that drives this whole thing, it's all about generational reaction. The community-minded heroes raise the individualistic prophets. The pragmatic nomads react against the moral crusades of the prophets. It's this constant push and pull between generations that moves that big wheel of history forward.
But hang on, there's a twist. What if we zoom way out? Is this 80 to 90-year clock a fixed thing? Or what if the entire cycle has actually been accelerating throughout human history? This leads us to a more recent idea called the VEF law of accelerating returns. It basically suggests that the stable cycles Strauss and Howe saw might just be a modern thing. If you look at the grand sweep of all of human history, the time between these huge societal reboots seems to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And this slide does a great job of showing the three big reasons why that might be happening. 1, exponential growth in our population. 2, an insane increase in the speed of technology and information. And 3, just the compounding complexity of our world. All these things could be squeezing the timeline, making those historical seasons arrive faster than ever before. Which, of course, leaves us with one last really big question. If history really does move in seasons, and if those seasons might be speeding up, it forces us all to look around and ask ourselves, what season are we in right now? And what does history's map suggest is just around the corner?